My first novel was about the sort of the end of the American dream for sort of the blue-collar middle class of America. And I knew that with the second book, with The Son, I wanted to explore the sort of the origin of that mythology. Where did this idea come from that the Americans stick to, that we have this power to reinvent ourselves completely? And so with any book, you're always looking for, you have a sense of what you want to say when you begin writing it. Usually your ideas, when you begin, they're quite weak, they're very cliche. But you're looking for the characters and the sort of story arc that will carry the sort of philosophical message that you're looking to explore. And so originally the book actually took place only over 75 years, 100 years, and the more I wrote, I realized, okay, if I'm really looking for this origin story of America, for the sort of roots of this mythology, I have to go back at least to the frontier, at least to the time when we were in combat with the Indians. I think we come up with two sets of mythologies in the U.S. One, which is from movies that you absorb almost through osmosis as a child, and which is this idea that people who look like us, most of us, gave their lives to found this great country, and they're fundamentally noble, good people, and who tamed this unsettled wilderness. The second mythology, the sort of counter mythology you learn in university, and this is the idea that the Native Americans, the Indians, were these sort of superhumanly good people, that they were incredibly philosophical, that they were almost demigods. They were superior to Europeans in every way. And so I had both of these things in my head, and as I began I read about 350 books of nonfiction to research the book, not all at once, but as I went through the process. And so both of these mythologies, both sides, of course, minimize the violence that they did, and emphasize the violence that was done toward them, which is normal. But the truth is that both sides were equally sort of violent and equally sort of bloody. North America, which again we sort of think of in this very sort of condescending way, we think of North America as this very peaceful place before we got there. Europeans somehow brought war and violence to North America. In fact, North America was just as violent as Europe or any other place when Europeans arrived, and the Native Americans were constantly at war with each other, as Europeans were constantly at war with each other. And so you begin to realize this, on one hand, that the violence done by the Native Americans to each other and to Europeans was extreme and constant, and then you realize that, of course, the violence done by my ancestors was also extreme. And what's recorded is, in fact, that the violence that's done by Europeans is not recorded that well. What I wanted to do with this was to take a modernist approach to the West, or again to the sort of the American creation myth. How would Faulkner have written about this? How would Joyce or Virginia Woolf have written about this? Even our greatest novelists have been nervous around this subject. So the modernists did not really write about this subject, I think, because it was too fresh, and also maybe they were a bit nervous about it. The best treatments of it have been probably in Cormac McCarthy and Larry McMurtry, but both of them take sort of almost intentionally narrow approach. McMurtry writes the most Lonesome Dove, a good book, but it's the most simplistic view of human nature that he's almost ever written. He sort of dumbs his view of human nature down. He makes everyone very sympathetic. Cormac McCarthy, Blood Meridian, which I think is the other great book about the West, does the opposite. He also narrows human nature, but instead of making everyone sympathetic, he makes everyone essentially evil. And this is not how people actually are. So I wanted to think, okay, how would Faulkner have written about this subject? And that was the sort of approach I took.